Okay, welcome everybody. As I said, I was going to finish up the last part of chapter 29 on using a YouTube video that I'm going to be posting. And so it should just take us about 5 to 10 minutes or so, just a few slides. But I wanted to first start off reviewing the two regulatory systems that we had introduced in class. The classic one is negative feedback, in which you can regulate some homeostatic variable around some set point. And it typically oscillates something like this because the regulatory system brings it up or down, and then the environment usually brings it the other way. So it sort of hovers around some static level instead of being exactly constant, right? So the whole idea of negative feedback is you have these different components. Let's just say A, B, C, and these tend to feed into each other. And in the end, usually you have at least one negative final effector that reduces the original error signal, so that the work of the system basically shuts itself off. And so that's what we call it negative feedback. It prevents it from accelerating out of control because it reduces the initial error signal that initiates the process. Then we have positive feedback as the alternative. Less common, but it is very important for bringing about abrupt changes. Things like birth, removing the fetus from the from the womb, molting or shedding of exoskeletons, excretion of anything from the body, sexual climax. These are all processes that amplify, where you have different components, in this case, all positively feeding back to amplify the system. And this keeps building it each time you go around this circle, building it to usually some sort of climatic event that ends it. Or it could go this way too, in either direction. The point is that it's going away from the set point that it started at, ending at some climatic experience. All right, so now what we're going to do is go on. Just a question, top hat question that I'll post for you guys. Which of these following are examples of negative feedback? So you just want to make sure you go through these and pick out the one that is negative. I believe the rest of these are all positive. All right, so this brings us to our last objectives for this chapter, which is talking about metabolic demand and body temperature. And these are two important factors, not the only, but very important factors for determining the burden that the body has in terms of homeostasis. And what you'll want to be able to do is be able to explain why body temperature is important and why it has such a big impact on metabolic needs and things like breathing, circulation, and waste excretion. So basically, anytime metabolic rate is high, the total metabolic activity within the body, this is total energy use, is high. You're going to have increased need for oxygen, delivering that oxygen and nutrients, and then also excretion of waste. All right, the next thing is you'll want to be able to explain why metabolic rate can be estimated from the measures of oxygen consumption for most animals under many conditions. And then lastly, here we'll compare and contrast endotherms and ectotherms in terms of their metabolic rates and how their metabolic rate is related to environmental temperature. All right, so the first thing is, what is metabolic rate? So basically, it's the total rate in which all energy is consumed by an individual, right? And this will strongly influence demands for nutrients, energy, water, and for getting rid of waste, for the amount of breathing and circulation. All right, so it's kind of natural. The more total metabolic activity, the more enzymatic reactions that are happening, then the more demand you place on the homeostatic parameters that are providing that energy and all the other associated functions like getting rid of waste and delivering of oxygen. All right, so remember we said that it takes a constant input of energy here in order to keep this open system alive and well and functioning, right? To fight off entropy. The whole point of the eating and obtaining energy is to fight off entropy and keep yourself in a complex state. And without that, you basically decay into a puddle of mush. All right, so the basal metabolic rate is basically the metabolic rate of an animal when it's at rest and hasn't eaten recently. And this is often compared between different species and also within a species of different sized organisms. All right, and so we can estimate this total use of energy by measuring oxygen consumption, because as you know, in the equation for cellular respiration, we have a carbohydrate plus oxygen is converted into CO2, water, and energy. And so what we're trying to do is measure this guy, energy. So we're not going to measure that directly. We're going to indirectly assume that by the rate of oxygen consumption based on this stoichiometry, knowing how many oxygens are related to how much energy. All right, it's not perfect. There are some assumptions that have to be made, and those assumptions are sometimes not correct. But for the most part, for aerobically respiring animals that are at rest, this seems to work pretty well. All right, so what about, we can divide all the animals, the animal kingdom, into two different groups in terms of their metabolism and body temperature. And so one category are the vast majority of organisms, and these are ectotherms, basically all the invertebrate animals, and well, basically almost all animals with the exception of birds and mammals, which are endotherms. All right, so ecto, what does that mean? That means outside or from another source. So the temperature of these animals is determined by external sources, basically by the environment, right? Endo, inside. So the temperature of these animals is determined by their body, inside of their bodies. All right, so the birds and mammals, only two groups that will, the major driver for their body temperature is internal metabolic reactions. And as you can see, birds and mammals all pretty much regulated around the same level, the upper 30s, around 37, 38, 39 degrees Celsius, regardless of what the ambient temperature is. All right, so this is clearly a strong regulating line. All right, all the other animals on Earth, starting from jellyfishes all the way up, doesn't matter, and to snakes and reptiles, their body temperature closely corresponds to the environmental temperature. Fishes are also in here too, so these are clearly temperature conformers. All right, so the exception to the rule, almost all organisms, period, on Earth are ectotherms. The two exceptions are birds and mammals. Right? All right, so what does that mean in terms of metabolic rate? All right, so in terms of an ectotherm, sometimes called poikilotherm, take a fish for example, let's look at what happens to their metabolic rate as temperature increases. What you'll notice is that kind of what you might expect, as temperature increases, the random motion of molecules increases, diffusion rates increase, and generally enzymatic reactions tend to increase as well. And so this rises metabolic rate, right? So we see this general trend towards an increasing metabolic rate. Now eventually this gets too high, the enzymes start to malfunction, the animal starts to malfunction, and you will see eventually this precipitous drop-off where you get death of the animal here. But up and before that point, where it's non-lethal, you do see this general trend towards an increase in metabolic rate proportionally with an increase in temperature. Now with endotherms, recall that the body temperature is going to be roughly 37 through this whole regime. The fish's temperature is going up and down like this with body temperature. Sorry, with environmental temperature. This guy's is not, so it's staying at 37. Now what you'll notice is that one thing is that generally the endotherms have a much higher metabolic rate. Same size animal, higher metabolic rate. And why is that? Well, as you might expect, it takes lots of energy to keep yourself warm like this. There's a lot of reactions going on here. So in general, an endotherm of the same size will have a metabolic rate 5 to 6 times higher than the same size ectotherm. Okay, so this rabbit, same size as this trout, but it has a 5 or 6 times high metabolic rate, regardless of temperature. Now notice that this relationship with temperature is very different in the endotherm. It's no longer this increasing function. It's actually got this sort of U shape to it. All right, and the U shape has a trough. This trough here is where the rabbit's body temperature is close to the environment, and it doesn't have to expend any extra energy to stay at that temperature, other than its normal core lowest amount of metabolic rate. So this would be basal metabolic rate for this animal. All right. Now, once you start getting colder, the environment gets colder, what the animal has to do is start shivering and using extra energy in order to stay warm, right? And so this line is going up as you go down below this critical threshold, right? It's using more and more energy, shivering more and more to stay warm, okay? Now the other way, the animal's having to pant, sweat, expend energy in order to stay cool and prevent its body temperature from going up. Okay, so that's why this is basically a U-shaped curve. The bottom part is where we measure basal metabolic rate in that animal. All right, so remember two things. One is that endos, I can't spell. Endos tend to have a higher metabolic rate than ectos. All right, and two, that the endos have a U-shaped relationship with temperature. 3, ectos tend to have a positive relationship because their body temperature is just, their metabolic rate just increases proportionally with temperature until they start to fail. All right, so that ends this section. Again, I apologize for having to do this outside of class, but I think it helps so I don't have to rush so much in class, and we can better use the time that we have. All right, I'll be posting this, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask either in class or in the discussion boards on Canvas. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.